So, someone just posted on Fountain Pen Enthusiasts whether there was such a thing as a flexible stub nib. First of all, a stub nib is different from a broad nib, and that is different from an italic nib or an oblique nib. But a broad nib has a ball of iridium on the end of its tip that is sort of shaped like a big fat oval. A squished potato, maybe. So here's our piece of iridium. So on the side stroke, it's going to be kind of fat, and on the downstroke, it's going to be fat. It's going to be fat regardless of where it goes, because it's this big gob of iridium. A stub nib, on the other hand, is a nib that is shaped. It's from looking down straight down at it, it might look more or less the same, but it's going to be fat on the downstroke and skinny on the side stroke. And an oblique nib or an italic nib, italic is a kind of lettering, not a kind of nib, but anyway, a nib that people use to make italic lettering is essentially a stub nib. Now, it could be cut this way, or even that way, I suppose, but it's just, it does the same thing. It makes a thin stroke on the side, a thick stroke on the down. And depending on where this is cut, you end up with, the thick and thin happens in a different kind of place. So here's our stub. Here's our breather bowl. So a stub, thin on the side stroke, fat on the downstroke, like this one. Without pressing down, I get a fat stroke this way and a thin stroke that way. So I can make my thou shalt not, Old English, the Bible script. Thou. Shalt not. Whatever it is. Old English. You can make it this Germanic script with this kind of lettering. You can make Roman script with this kind of lettering to a degree. It's thin on the side, fatter on the downstroke. You can do it italic, script, etc. Thick and thin. A pointed pen, on the other hand, a pen that is used for script, the thick and thin is based on the pressure you put down. Well, if you had a flexible nib and a stub nib that managed to have sex and make a baby, you would have a flexible stub. So a flexible stub, when you press down on it, if this was made of gold, it gets fatter. So you can get a fatter line on the way down, and this is one such flexible stub. It's not all that flexible, but it is somewhat flexible. No pressure, pressure. Is it twice as big? It's a little bit bigger. Now, I do have a bunch of flexible nib pens. Stub nib pens. Some of these are quite flexible. Here is now, whether these were thought of by the buyer or the pen salesman when he was selling this pen to someone way back then, they might have called this a broad nib because maybe it's not fine enough on the side stroke to be considered a true stub. I think any pen that's fatter on the downstroke than the side stroke is a stub. So this one, no pressure, pressure, no pressure, pressure. Side stroke. The side is always going to be finer than the downstroke. And this is, you see how that spreads? Let's see if I can find one that doesn't do that. Here's a Schaefer Lifetime nib. Now, does this have actual iridium on it? There's one that I had that was missing a chunk of iridium, and I just castrated the other ball off, the other half off, and sort of filed it down to make a stiff stub. And I think that's what this one is. Let me just look under the loop. Yes, this is entirely missing its iridium. So it's writing on the gold itself, but because it's a Schaefer and most Schaefer nibs are very stiff, it's very stiff as well. Here's a Waterman. This is pretty darn stiff. Well, there is a difference. There is still a difference between no pressure and pressure. I can still get some out of this one, even though it feels very stiff. It's going to be pretty stiff too. This is just broad flex, so it's fat on the side stroke, fatter. And this is another very fine side stroke. Somewhat flexible nib on the downstroke. Why is this even here? Why is this in this drawer? This is just a stiff old thing. So you can see, maybe, this one is fine flexible, stub, flexible stub, another Waterman. I'm saving kind of the best for last, or not. This is one I got on eBay. It's a really big stub, Waterman. This one is not very flexible. Very sharp on the side, not flexible really on the downstroke. I had two safety pens that had even double that width of iridium on the tines, and they were for a sign painter. try. Okay, here's it's a 51 that's really broad. That's not the one I wanted to show you. Here's a 51 with a factory stub nib, which you can't see. Really big, very, very sharp on the side stroke. Another broad or a stub Schaefer pen, again with a little bit of give to it, but pretty stiff. That's not it. Okay, where are you? It must be this one. Yes, this one is, and unfortunately in my exuberance of showing this off so much, I did manage to cause a little bit of trauma to its nib. I don't think there's a crack. It's just bent pretty badly. But clearly a stub. Very flexible. It's like using a paintbrush. Unfortunately, I really should try to flatten this out. There's a little bit of stress happening right around here, and I don't like that. And nor do you. Some of these nibs look pretty broad rather than stub. The stubness of a pen really is the side stroke. The side stroke is meant to be very thin. These are all music nibs, and a music nib is shaped like this, rather than one tine, one slit. It has two. That means that this already stub nib can spread like that, and you'll get this extra fat line with little pressure, and it's for making musical notes. The problem with these pens are you have to make sure all three tines are hitting the ground at the same time, and I always find that one of them ends up skipping for me, railroading, and the other one doesn't. Here's another one. See how this one goes. God, I hate these things. Oh, here's a Waterman. Music pen. Sometimes, the music pens don't have a really fine side stroke, though. They're broad. They're a broad nib that just gets extra broad. For me, a safety pen, a stub nib is meant to be really, really prickly sharp on the side stroke. But there you go. See if I can put all of these back where they were from. These stubs. Here's a stub. well, if it had ink, I'm just using dirty water, but it's like the parallel pens that Pelikan makes, and they are clearly stubs. Well, can't tell by that awful side stroke. Why are these so... Why is that happening? These are not flexible. I really don't quite know why these are in this drawer, but they are. Flexible stubs. Bye.